It is December, and it's now that time of year that we start to have office parties, family gatherings, lots of festive decorations, and a flurry of gift giving. But it doesn't feel much like it, does it? Now, I live in southern Florida now, so decorations that involve snowmen and tinsel-covered pine trees are always kind of out of place. I'm experiencing a lot of cognitive dissonance sitting on the beach, but hearing Christmas music in the background. It's difficult to get in a Christmas mood for a first-time Christmas celebrator in Florida, but even more, I think anyone who's watching the news these days is going to have a hard time getting happy about very much. We're now in an election year in which we will apparently once again have a presidential election between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, although it seems likely to me that Trump will be in prison for 2 or 3 profoundly good reasons before next November. And if I were betting on whether Biden would still be standing on his own power and capable of feeding himself by Election Day, I'm afraid I wouldn't be inclined to vote against it. I wish him well. I sincerely do. I think he's done a great job. But I'm from Kentucky, and we are used to looking a horse up and down in the paddock before we place our bets on the track. And I'm not liking what I see when I see clips of our current president, and certainly have never liked what I see when I hear Donald Trump. We're nearing a second year of war in Europe. As the ground freezes in Ukraine and Russia regains the ability to advance against a people desperately locked in a battle to retain their freedom, and ringing the familiar bells of what could lead the world into a global conflict, the battle between Hamas and Israel threatens to drag the West Bank, Lebanon, Iran, Jordan into a battle that none of us would be able to ignore. Now, I realize that the media makes more money when they can keep us scared and glued to our TV sets. And I don't want to fall prey to that kind of hysteria. But folks, seriously, there are dire circumstances in the world that we cannot ignore. As a pastor, as a spiritual person, I've grown far beyond the superstition and mythology that concerns itself with souls or God's judgment or eternal prospects of an imaginary heaven or hell. For most of us, spirituality has to do with our personal striving to be better people and our corporate work to try to make the world a better place. Given the complexity and severity of our current circumstances, it's no wonder that most of the people that I am now meeting in my new community seem to want to avoid all news about politics or global conflicts. Heaven knows, as the home state of both Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, no conversation lasts more than a few seconds before you find despair is staring you in the face. We have, over the past 2 years, been easily decisive in talking about Vladimir Putin being a war criminal, and we have confidently taken sides with Ukraine in a war that is absolutely such that it cannot be lost to Russia. We cannot let this war be successful from Putin's side. Putin's tactics of attacking civilian populations, stealing and deporting thousands of children to Russia to be brainwashed into seeing the Ukraine-Russian relationship only from a Russian vantage point. Hard data is difficult to be certain of, but it seems safe to say that nearly 10,000 civilians have been killed in 20 months of this illegal war in the Ukraine. President Zelensky has said that nearly twice that number of children have been abducted and taken to Russia. This is an incomprehensible social terror, and it cannot be allowed to continue. And Putin cannot survive this conflict and stay in power. Ukraine simply must win. Now, I'm all for peace negotiations, but however this war ends, Putin must not be rewarded with either land or power as a result of having launched this terrible war. But I want to raise a more specific concern with you today about the war taking place in Gaza. As guilty as the Netanyahu government has been in its mistreatment of the residents of the Gaza Strip, there's no plausible justification for the October 7 terrorist attack on Israel by Hamas. They targeted the most vulnerable citizens. They stormed in and raped women and murdered children, going specifically by map to child care centers and setting up snipers to kill the elderly as they were fleeing towards what they hoped would be safety in underground bunkers. It was ruthless. It was barbaric. I lack the adjectives to describe how wrong and how horrible this assault was. And as much as Palestinians have complained about being treated as if their lives did not matter, as if they were somehow subhuman, behaving in a manner that gives credence to the belief that they are subhuman certainly doesn't help their cause in the eyes of the world. They are still holding hostages, trying to protect themselves against counterattack by hiding behind hostages and their own civilian population, making demands that they are daily less likely to receive, specifically because they are still holding hostages. There is no nation on earth that would not strike back against such a heinous terrorist attack. It could not be ignored, and it certainly couldn't be excused. However, folks, the mere fact that Israel has every right, even every obligation, to defend themselves, that does not give them carte blanche to carry out a virtual genocide in Gaza. There have been about 10,000 civilian deaths in 2 years of Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. But there may have been 100,000 civilian deaths in Gaza in just the first 2 months of Israel's military response to Hamas. Yeah, it's true. Hamas does hide in tunnels, and they operate out of apartment complexes and from beneath hospitals. They're terrorists. They don't fight fairly. But what is Israel if they can excuse such a massive rate of civilian deaths just because it is difficult to target Hamas without collateral deaths numbering in the thousands, most of whom are children under the age of 18? It's not a one-to-one comparison. Putin's invasion of Ukraine was unprovoked, it was inexcusable, and it is a use of a nation's military to accomplish what can only be seen as terrorist goals. But even though Israel was attacked, they were not attacked by the children of Gaza. And if Hamas were hiding in tunnels under an Israeli hospital, Netanyahu would not order a missile strike on that hospital to kill Hamas militants. Israel doesn't want to be tarred with the brush of terrorism, alleging that they treat Palestinians as being subhuman, keeping them confined in a virtual open-air prison for generations and killing them indiscriminately whenever there are hostilities. Israeli officials take great offense at these allegations, but it sure doesn't help their case when they show the world through their actions that the allegations are true. Even the war in Ukraine has its complicating factors. Prior to the February 2022 invasion, I was willing to say that Putin had a case to be made about NATO expansion and that he had reason to demand some redress of those concerns. But his invasion of Ukraine and his war crimes committed at his command has made it clear that Putin cannot be treated as a civilized global political leader, and he simply cannot be trusted, nor can he be tolerated in the modern world. But isn't this situation in Gaza eroding our ability to think of Israel as a civilized player in the global theater? Sure, Hamas is a terrorist organization. Putin is a terrorist who happens to have state credentials. But what is Israel? Is this in any way a defensible retaliation for the October 7th attack? Or is it more of a genocide of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip? Maybe something that Netanyahu and some of his right-wing adherents have always wanted to do. As horrible as October 7th was, isn't it increasingly evident that Netanyahu is using public sympathy to carry out what he and others have called mowing the grass? An obscene notion. I have no idea what Netanyahu's end goal is. Does he think he's going to force Egypt or Lebanon or Jordan to simply accept all surviving Gaza inhabitants as new immigrants into their country? Or does he, God help us, actually plan to kill them all? I want to remind you of that famous warning from Friedrich Nietzsche that if you stare into the abyss long enough, you're likely to find the abyss staring back at you. Netanyahu and other conservatives in Israel have focused so hard on their hatred of terrorists that it seems it is difficult to tell them apart. Hamas does what they do without any pretense of civility. But while Israel drops leaflets warning Gaza residents to flee to the south for safety, they still go ahead and bomb areas of the south after they have gotten Gaza residents to go there to hide. They still are killing Gaza residents no matter where they go. They have a pretense of civilization, but it's something like putting chocolate frosting on a brick. If you fight terrorists with the same bloodlust that terrorists use, you find that the abyss is already staring back at you. Still, I get it. If Israel disarmed, their neighbors would probably kill them before the weekend was over. Yet if their neighbors disarmed, we might expect an actual state of peace. But as seductive as that sort of philosophical paradox might be, neither the Palestinians nor the Israelis are going to disarm. But this is not a battle between aggressors and victims who are defending themselves. There are serious offenses on both sides, but Israel is winning only because they have the bigger guns. I don't think we as Americans, the nation that has a larger Jewish population than Israel does by most counts, a nation that has a dispersed and diverse Muslim population living among us all over our 50 states, and the nation that is singularly capable of arming Israel and making it be victorious, even though they are massively outnumbered by their neighbors who chant from the river to the sea, and they mean it exactly that way. America holds the real key to Israel's continued existence, but in my opinion, they have to know that they have gone too far. And our support cannot be assumed to be a blank check in the face of what can only be called war crimes being committed by the Israeli government. If you have for a moment ever called Vladimir Putin a war criminal, you cannot look at what Netanyahu is doing and not see that it is much worse. I've often articulated my regret that we took Palestinian land to create a Jewish homeland. But right or wrong, the Holocaust was a historical event that demanded that the world provide a safe place for Jews to live and to be able to defend themselves against a Holocaust ever taking place again. It is where it is, no matter how much I question that decision. And I do question it, but now I have to see that I am questioning it as a historical issue. It has to continue to exist, and there is no way to move it to a more logical location. President Biden has explained several times that we had to support Ukraine's war to maintain their independence, not just for Ukraine, but to make it clear to China that they cannot expect to invade Taiwan and get away with it unscathed, that they can expect us to help Taiwan in much the same way, without saying it in just so many words, but certainly implying it in every possible way. But if we are also supporting Netanyahu with money, with weapons, no matter how cruel and monstrous his attack on the Palestinians has become, then what kind of signal are we really sending, either to China or Russia, or for that matter, to Iran or North Korea? Putin's argument always has been that what he is doing is no different from what other world powers do, pointing at our invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. And if Netanyahu is murdering civilians 10 times faster than Putin is, and we are still supporting his war effort, then, folks, is Putin actually wrong in saying that what he's doing is no different than what America does? If our faith leads us to be the best people we can possibly be, and to create the best nation and the best world we can create, then we cannot have an on-again, off-again relationship with the moral high ground. If war crimes are wrong for Russia, if they're wrong for Syria and Iran and China, then war crimes have to be wrong for Israel, and they have to be wrong for the United States. If we are sincerely outraged by the horrible offenses of Hamas on October 7, and how could we not be, then we cannot be indifferent to the mass murders taking place in Gaza at the hands of the Israeli military. And simply turning off the news doesn't change anything. Silence at this moment is tantamount to consent. Now, I'm going to try hard to work my way around to do something like a Merry Christmas message in a couple of weeks, because this season of joy really is about our children, isn't it? But you know what else is about our children? Peace. Peace is for children. Peace is for Muslim children. Peace is for Jewish children and Christian children. And peace is for Russian children and Ukrainian children and Palestinian children and Israeli children. And we grown-ups don't have to give it to them or teach it to them. They're already there. We just have to stop taking it away from them.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.